Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. The Grant. My name is Niels Tudor Winter, and I am the creator, editor, and host of The Grant. The Grant is an independent, non-commercial podcast initiative with the ambition to dig into all corners of the EU R&D funding system on topics of interest for the full EU R&D funding community. I have slowly moved into including other funding schemes than Horizon Europe. The Grant is thought to cover broadly the main European funding schemes. Not long ago, I had a double episode presenting an Erasmus Plus project. So the natural step for me was to move to Erasmus Plus next. Therefore, this episode is an introduction to the Erasmus Plus program, or Erasmus Plus, the EU program for education, training, youth and sports, as it is officially named. I have little experience with this funding scheme myself, so I invited one of my good old contacts, Ulla-Alexandra Mattl, project director at the consultancy company Eurakom and external evaluator, into the virtual podcast studio to guide me through the Erasmus Plus program. And you, of course. Making a solid introduction to a funding scheme takes a little time, so this became a double episode. In this first half, we start off looking at the EU Commission's purpose with the funding scheme, the structure of the program, and the target groups. Excellent for any Erasmus Plus applicant or would-be applicant. Please enjoy. The Grant. Welcome to The Grant, the EU funding podcast. I am continuing to try to build content, strong content around all sorts of corners within the EU funding world. And any of my listeners and regulars will know that I keep saying that it's a big animal to chew down. And it is. But since I'm releasing episodes every week, I'm slowly eating myself in on everything, or at least corners here, to getting more and more content. Now, lately, I have had some episodes around Erasmus. So we had a project presentation around that in 2 episodes, project, and the formation project. And many of my contacts actually have experience within Erasmus. So given that this is supposed to be a broad EU funding, R&D funding podcast, it is also going to cover Erasmus and the LIFE program and so on and so forth. But this means that I have reached out to one of my old contacts that has a particular knowledge of Erasmus, and we're supposed to, in a podcast like this, have an introduction program that is generic and that everybody can go into and say, okay, how is it with this program? And I just keep blabbering on, and I have a guest on board. It's always like this. Ulla, welcome.
Hello, nice to have you. No, sorry. That's a good start.
No worries. Great to have you in, Ulla.
Thanks for having me.
Could you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, well, actually, it's a bit of a long story, I think. Well, I'll try to keep it short. I think the most interesting part is probably linked to education here, because it will be linked to the program. I have been working with Erasmus or other funding programs for almost 20 years now. And first, in the context of Creative Europe, the former Creative Europe program is the Culture program, and then the Lifelong Learning program, which was the predecessor of Erasmus. In Brussels, I've been in Brussels for more than 20 years. I have been working with European affairs linked to various areas, but especially in education and culture. And in that framework, I've worked with all sectors of education and lifelong learning. So they're all relevant for Erasmus. And then I've also worked with higher education. So I've represented 12 London universities in Brussels. And in that context, I also work with, research programs, research funding programs. But I think what I have to say also, there is a big difference, of course, because Erasmus, I mean, that's what everybody always says. It's not linked to research. So any Erasmus projects, they're not research oriented, really.
No, but still, you have elements there in the program that is
yes, but the activities
is developing vocational training, developing education, also university studies, and so on.
There are some links, of course, because obviously also higher education is relevant for Erasmus. But the activities are usually not research-oriented in the same way, with the same seriousness or scientific sort of academic side of things.
Yeah, no. Exactly. It's not like they are digging into having like research. This is about education. Yeah, this is about training and how it's more like the method of education, so to say, of educational courses and programs and so on. Right?
And mobility. There's a lot of mobility involved.
Yeah.
So that's my experience that will be linked to Erasmus. But then I've worked in a lot of different areas, in private, public, and so on. And right now I have various hats. I work for Eurakom, which is a consultancy in France. We work in various sectors. We have a strong focus on energy. And when it comes to European funding, I have developed the area of tourism. We work on infrastructure projects in the north of France and other areas in France, and that was sort of the trigger to start working on tourism. And I've linked the European funding, the projects that we have at the moment, to tourism. So that's our strength right now, or the strength in EU funding.
Yeah. It's for northern France, probably these outskirt tourists as an element of outskirt northern France, right? It's not. Yeah, it's you have Lille as an urban center, but there's a lot of places in Cordoba and so on that are reliant on
that's where we
tourism,
are.
right?
That's where the company is based, actually. Yes, I'm in Brussels, but the company is in France. And yes, it's a very important area for tourism, but there's also a lot of room for development, because especially people, it's a drive-through place also. A lot of people go through it to go somewhere else. So it's also about developing an offer for people to stop and actually stay for longer than just one night, and developing some offer also around there. And our focus is really on sustainability and positive impact. So that is what we are trying to do. We don't really are a consultancy, the typical one. We really want to work on projects that sometimes we come up with ourselves, and then we look for the partners to develop them. And we want to have a positive sort of impact with it. We're not just looking for clients, if you want.
Yeah, you have this approach from some smaller consultancy companies that sort of dig themselves deeper into a specific area, and then they also develop project ideas themselves and so on. That's also a way of no. Anything else about? So, if shortly about Eurakom, as I say to all my guests, shameless self-promotion. Is there anything about presentation about the company?
No, I think that's okay.
Thanks. Ulla, we need to talk about the Erasmus funding program today.
Okay.
Yeah? And I hope it doesn't come as a surprise.
No.
So if we just have as a fly-in about the funding program, so can you make so the frame the funding program?
I think I would just start with what everybody thinks of first when you talk about Erasmus. Most people think of Erasmus students and mobility, and I guess that's how some of us started also. I also did my Erasmus, and that's how the program became famous. But at the time, it was only actually the mobilities that were called Erasmus. Mm-hmm. Erasmus Plus was really about going and studying somewhere else, or participating in some kind of exchange later on. But the main sort of how it all started was mainly the mobilities. And then that's what everybody knows it for. And then of course we have different the names of the programs always change, and so it was the lifelong learning program, which was the predecessor now that I mentioned of Erasmus Plus now. And when the name changed to Erasmus, everybody was very kind of not happy about it, because they were thinking, oh, we're going to get all mixed up now. Now everything is Erasmus and we're not going to know what's what anymore. There's no distinction between this and that, and everything's now Erasmus and Erasmus Plus and so on. But then, of course, as it always happens, people get used to it very quickly, and now nobody even remembers the other program. So,
which changes,
which was called the lifelong learning program, and had different features also and different ways of setting up projects and so, and I think what one has to know also is that the program changes. I mean, as they always do. They try to make it simpler, but you have to be on top of it, of these developments also, because every year there's something new that you have to know. So even if you're familiar with it, there's always some new things, and you have to find out how it now works, or how this works, and how you have to work with the different calls and program because of the changes.
So that's the baseline for all funding programs, right?
Exactly.
It's especially the commission programs, because you always, even within specific calls inside a program, you can have different small variations you need to be aware of. But yeah, you always need to read carefully the specific call. Conditions for approaching whatever funding program.
And I think that's also the challenge for people who start off, because there's so many things you have to know to actually be successful. It's the same with all the programs. So it takes some time to get into it. And
we will get back to that, because even though I'm not an expert, I do have a few understandings of how things work, and it's different from the Horizon Europe in some respects. That it would be so nice if they could just make the same rules.
Oh yes,
but it's probably just like this. Now, but anyways, just before we finish the fly-in, so it's mobility, it's vocational trainings, and it's universities, right?
No, I think that would mix it up a bit. So I say it's mobilities.
Yeah.
Then it's cooperation. So it's I would say strategic partnerships and cooperation partnerships. Mm-hmm. And then you have three key actions. So mobility, cooperation, partnerships, and then you have policy reform. So these projects are more policy oriented. And then you have some other actions also under the program. But and then within the different actions, then you have different subsectors or different ways of doing things.
But just for everybody to understand, this is about developing education. Educational sector, right?
So you have, of course, the priorities of the European Commission, which are linked to education. So we have to maybe mention also that education is, of course, still a national priority. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of things going on. And anything that happens in Erasmus is also linked to other EU policies. Mm-hmm. Like the Green Deal. Yeah. But then you have some that are really sort of key for the education sector. You have the European education area. You have this European skills agenda. And for example, the digital education action plan. So they are all some kind of really important sort of policy, backgrounds, I would say, that need to be followed, and which form also the basis for what Erasmus does. But ultimately, it's about more qualitative, inclusive education. It's about skills development.
Mm-hmm.
It's about modernization in education. It's about new methodologies. And it's depending on the different sectors. We will get to that, I guess.
Yep.
You have, it's really about looking at the needs that have been identified in each of the sectors to develop things according to these broader policies.
Yeah, good. So now let's just thanks. So let's have a look. So you already sort of started spreading out the bouquet of the EU and their policies and priorities with Erasmus. So the things you just mentioned as back curtains from the European Commission. Is there anything else to say about policies and priorities in relation to Erasmus, the principles from the Commission side?
I think, when it comes to Erasmus, there are big differences also within the program. So, for example, when it comes to mobilities, it really depends on which subsector it is. But ultimately, for example, for the mobilities, it's about going abroad, and it's about learning new things about and I mean we all know the value of going somewhere abroad for an exchange, or even it's I mean for example the mobilities are for staff or students or educators, or to go abroad, do a training or an exchange. Whereas when it comes to the cooperation partnerships, you have other priorities. You have horizontal priorities, and then you have sector-specific priorities. And the horizontal priorities are really very much in line with the overall EU sort of policies and main priorities. They're quite straightforward. So, I mean, they also change. They changed with the introduction of the new program in 2021. When something happens, something specific, like we had the migrant crisis in 2015, suddenly a new priority comes in, and then there is a specific call to cover this. Or after COVID, there was a specific call for creatives because the sector suffered tremendously, for example. So there was a specific call just for that. But the new program has defined some priorities, which are, for example, I can name them. We have sustainability, of course, climate change, which is closely linked to the Green Deal, which is all about making education more sustainable, raise awareness about sustainability, bring about innovation, behavioral change, and so on in education. And then you have the digital aspect, which is also linked to the twin transition, which is also a key thing. And so what I mentioned earlier, the digital education action plan. Digital tools for learning, platforms, applications, all these kind of methodologies. And then, of course, in Erasmus, we had this thing about the distance education during COVID. So this really triggered this whole thing about how can we upskill people, because they were not up to scratch. All these educators and teachers, they didn't know how to deal with this situation.
No, and especially Germany, where I lived. Ulla.
I think everywhere, and there's definitely some countries who were lost with this. So this triggered this whole thing, and there's a lot going on, and it's a real sort of priority. And then you have inclusion. Inclusion is a huge topic in Erasmus. And even if you don't select this priority, you still have to say why your project is inclusive, and you have to say how many people you're going to reach who are not. When we talk about inclusion, we talk about just disability or marginalized groups, but it can also be people who are in a remote area, for example. So all of these, this is really important. And the other one, the last one, horizontal one, is about democracy, participation, which is really about core EU values. And so they are sort of linked to the basis of education. And I guess this is a priority that will mostly be chosen in youth projects or school projects, maybe.
I think if zooming a little bit out, it's not, the principle is the same as in other EU funding programs, that you have decisions being made at the Commission member state level about which direction to go. You have all these big plans or missions and so on about society, broader societal directions that the Commission wants us to go and the member states want us to go. And then it sieves down in... and it get expressions sort of here and there in specific calls in the technology related. It's like environment or sustainability sieves down, for instance, at gender in research, stuff like this. And here in education, it's inclusion, cultural exchange, democracy. So it's sort of a good way of seeing it, that things they sort of go down into the concrete calls and concrete projects that are funded, these values.
The advantage with these cooperation projects, which is the key action 2, is really that you can choose which priorities you want to work with. So you have these horizontal ones, and then you have the sector specific ones. So you have to choose also which sector. But the advantage is you can fit your ideas into this. Of course, you still have to you have to explain very clearly why you want to work with one or the other priority, but at least you have some more flexibility. Because it's not just a call which is too specific, as we have it in sometimes in Horizon, where it's so specific, exactly, what needs to be done, and you don't have a lot of flexibility there. So that you have in Erasmus, there is more flexibility, I think.
It's broader, the call text, the experience I have, the small experience that I do have with going through these things, yes, it's easier to fit in a project idea, so to say. That can be tricky with some of the Horizon Europe, especially the industry Pillar 2 proposal calls. Ulla, let's move on to digging a little bit, getting our hands dirty, so to say, on the program specific elements here. So what I have here in the rundown, so structure of the program, how's the funding program divided in terms of areas that it funds? What are these? So if you can explain a little bit about these key actions, typical project activities, the classical Erasmus project, and so on. So,
I'm just thinking about the areas it funds, because in research funding you really have areas. You have the missions, and you have you have certain. They're all thematic. Basically, you work on one sector or the other sector. Mm-hmm. And in Erasmus, you can fit any sector into the project, basically, as long as you work in you have to choose the sector of education you want to work with.
Yeah.
So, and then they're very different one from the other. So there you have, you have higher education, of course, and these projects are very different from other sectors, mostly universities cooperating, because the priorities would be about modernizing higher education and really about cooperation between universities. Mm-hmm. And then you have schools, of course, nothing to do with what happens in universities. really about teachers, learning tools, things that benefit the students. I mean, the pupils at schools. For example, a prevention of early school leaving, or issues linked to inclusion, where to make sure the students or the pupils have access to quality education, for example, this type of thing. And then you have vocational education and training, and that is either for the students who are in training at the vocational institutions, and there one has to think also of that there is a big difference across Europe. So this can be secondary or tertiary. So this can also be higher education level. So there are overlaps also between these different sectors.
Yeah.
And when it comes to vocational,
just for people to understand, so vocational in this term is covering nurses or technician, like electricians or
I mean what we work a lot
technical education,
for example, or we work a lot with tourism. So we have you would have any kind of hotel or tourism management, or people learning how to chefs, so this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which can be education that you do from the age of 15, like upper secondary, or it can be some sort of short degree after you finished school, or it can even be higher education also, because some countries you have to do this kind of degree in a tertiary level, but it's still vocational.
Yeah. It can also be if relating to, say, sustainability or energy transition, for instance, district heating. You need people who can put pipes together or know exactly the technologies on electricity from the different DCs coming from offshore wind, stuff like this. These kind of people. Or it can also be shifting from oil and gas rigs, right? People working there to shifting to other kinds of.
That sounds more like your field.
But I've been looking into this before when I was supporting the wind people, and there you would have in Erasmus possibility of re-education, so to say.
Yes, upskilling and so on
for people from oil and gas to offshore wind.
Yes, reskilling and upskilling.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's why I said it can work for any sector. This thing.
Exactly.
But the interesting thing about vocational education and training as a sector is that you can work with this. Obviously, there is a lot. The priority is a lot around also developing connections between education and business. Why? Because it's about being up to date to meet the needs for the labor market, as they say it.
Yeah.
And then, as such, you work a lot also with professionals. So when you do a vocational education and training project, you don't necessarily only have to work with vocational training providers. You can also work with SMEs, professionals, and upskill or reskill them, because there is a big focus in terms of priorities of increasing the offer of continuous vocational education training for professionals, because there are not enough offers, and usually companies don't have small companies, especially SMEs, don't have the capacity, the access, or the resources to engage in trainings, and there are not enough. So there is a gap there, and so this is also one of the priorities of the program, to work with professionals and close the link a bit between what happens in education and in practice on the ground in companies or SMEs.
So I think it sort of give an idea of what kind of areas it funds. Can you tell us?
I'm not done yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Tell me.
No, we miss one, and that's the youth. Youth is another sector. The calls are usually a bit different timings and so on. But that's another sector. I work mostly myself with vocational education and training, at the moment at least. But yes, there are 4 4 sectors, so we shouldn't forget the last one.
Of course. Ulla, can you, these key actions, what are they?
So we have, as I mentioned, there are 3. There are 3 actions. The first one is mobility. Really, it's all about mobility. These mobilities are mostly really, let's say, applications by education providers who are looking for exchanges, either school or education centers, or also higher education mobilities. I didn't mention, but I also work as an evaluator for Erasmus for 2 agencies, and so I've also evaluated some mobilities of universities going to all sorts of places. And I think it's actually something I didn't mention in the beginning, but the interesting view I have is that I have been part of the whole cycle. So the project development, the implementation, but then also the evaluation of the proposals.
Okay. Yeah.
And that actually gives you a very good overview of everything. And of course, evaluation helps tremendously with the development of the projects, because even if you know how to do it, you see it from a different perspective as an evaluator, and so you understand the challenges also better in how. You know how to write a better proposal, but you're also a bit troubled by having to do it in a certain way, rather than your own way, if you see. Yeah. So sorry, I got a bit off track there.
No, it's okay. What I was thinking about, so you have key action 1, so that's the mobility part, and then you have the key action 2, that's the collaboration projects on concrete, let's just say, education. And then you have key action 3, that's the sort of more policy. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if we sort of zoom in on, because the mobility is, that's what it is. That's exchanging of students and PhDs, right?
Stuff yes, like and I think what is there, part of this also is that there is quite a big market for those who receive, for example, those who want to be trained. So it's not just between education providers, like a vet provider with another vet provider, because those exchanges exist, and there are youth exchanges also, which are a different type of thing. But there is also a big market for those who, like companies who develop trainings to attract, for example, staff from schools to do a training on one or another topic. So there is also this whole area of development of trainings to sell them pretty much to those who are engaging in these mobilities. That's maybe something to mention. But I think the zoom is really into the KA2, because there are a lot of different things going on there.
Yeah. So what I want to talk about, so I want to zoom in on that, and then, so if we take a tip, what's the typical project activities under key action 2?
So activities, well, I think, it depends on the calls, really.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if we start with the strategic partnerships or cooperation partnerships, which are typically, they used to be projects, had to be a minimum of 3 partners from 3 different countries, and they used to be flexible. They used to be flexible in terms of how much money you ask for, in terms of budget, up to a certain limit. But you calculate your budget yourself. These are like the ones I mentioned, where you have the the horizontal priorities, and then you have to select sector-specific priorities. So the key is to select, okay, which sector do you want to work with? And then you select a priority linked to the sector, and then you can work on different sectors. But the principles are the same for all of the sectors, and in this case, to strategic partnership projects. Now, what has been added a year ago, which is quite recent, is the small-scale project. And so that was an interesting new thing. It was added. Why? Because I think there was a sort of there was a market for Erasmus Plus. Very often, always the same suspects. Some people make a business out of it to just write projects and be in projects. So they become factories. And that has also triggered sort of the desire, let's say, of the Commission to make it more accessible. It's more accessible to smaller organizations and companies who maybe don't have the capacity or the financial sort of resources to back up a bigger one. Mm-hmm. And I want to get acquainted with the program. So these are small projects of between either 30 or 60,000. You have to choose one or the other. And then you choose the sector. They don't exist for higher education, but they exist for the other sectors. Mm-hmm. And it really is a simplified sort of procedure. And it allows newcomers who don't have any experience to submit the project. And you can do it from two partners. And it's a way to get into it.
But those are specific calls?
No.
It's all calls?
It's always, it's, calls, specific calls. Yes, they're calls for small scale, but they are recurring. So they are a standard call now, twice a year. This is the small scale. And I think, you can do it from two partners. And the problem with these is just that it's still a lot of work, and then there is not a lot of budget. But it's for partners who want to, maybe also they have been a partner before in a project and they want to coordinate for the first time. So it's a way of trying it out and seeing what that means before you go anywhere else.
Anyways, speaking about structure of the program, the funding, so the budget levels, they are significantly lower than in Horizon Europe, right?
Yes, but it also, they are lower, but it's still, again, it depends on the call. So this what I just explained was about the small scale. Then for the bigger ones, for the partnerships, you have now a lump sum system. So as I said before you calculated it and it was relatively, you could adapt it to your needs. Now the challenge is you have to fit it into a lump sum.
Explain that.
So the system is you have three options. You have 120, 250 or 400,000. And then you have to see, how many partners can you fit into each of these sort of lump sums? I would say for 120, not more than 3. For 250, 5 or 6, and then for 400, maybe 8 maximum. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the idea. But the challenge is that you have to you have a sum, and then you have to kind of also create your activities to fit this sum. And you have to explain it, why it is cost efficient, of course. And the other interesting part is, because I am an evaluator, is that it's become a bit of a sort of yes or no. When it comes to the evaluation, usually in the past, you could, as an evaluator, suggest budget cuts if you felt like in some way they were exaggerating a bit here or there, and you could maybe suggest a cut, and the project would still go through. It just had a reduced budget in one or the other place. And that was not a problem. Now it is not possible because they either get it or they don't get it. Mm-hmm. So if the budget is really a key element of these projects, because if it doesn't look, there is a lot more flexibility in the rates you give for people to work on it. But if I still feel like it has to be aligned to the previous program or a previous sort of mechanism to convince evaluators, because otherwise it will look, people, evaluators are also used to the previous program, and they will go, oh, they're asking for too much, and what, 30,000 for a conference, not possible. And then the project doesn't go through just because of that. And so basically a project is failed sometimes just because of the budget now, whereas previously that was not the case.
Yeah, I've heard this before from other guests about in other contexts that the evaluators, they sort of actually don't have under their skin new rules and so on, and then they are
I think that the thing with these changes is that even the agencies have different ideas about it, because the national agencies, they all work differently. They have their own sort of also priorities and different ways of working. And then it's hard when there are changes, because evaluators, they don't really know, and the agencies don't really know for sure. And then it's all a bit sort of, you don't know as an applicant where you're heading, because, it's not clear, basically.
Now, if we look a little bit about, so I put here the classical Erasmus project. I know that it's of course diverse, but just to take an example, so the project that I had in the virtual podcast studio, the formation project, that was they wanted to make a research manager education, university education. So the steps of that was, of course, to gather the university partners and the training organizations, and then they would make these training, they would develop the training sessions, and then they would practically carry them out and testing them and see what works, what doesn't work, and so on. Now, it's so this was developing a university course, right?
Yeah.
If you, in your head, the classical Erasmus Plus project, so to say, could you give a couple of examples of things that you have without sharing things you're not allowed to share?
No, I think there are only so many structures one can have in an Erasmus project, let's say. Yeah. So eventually you will have gone through them all. I think it's linked to just the budget also, because and the fact maybe also that it's not a research project, as I explained. So you have to start with some kind of background material. Usually, either it's some kind of desk research, not sort of the scientific kind. Collection of practices or tools or other things like that, similar, to create some kind of foundation.
Curriculum.
Exactly, that you will then use for some kind of curriculum development or the development of a tool. What else is there? You can do courses, you can do apps, you can do serious games, you can do even escape games or whatever. There's always some kind of part that you create based on something that you have previously done, like a survey or whatever, some kind of research that you have done. Then you develop a course, which is then for your target group, whatever that might be. And then, of course, you have to test it. Usually, you have to pilot it with some participants. And then you have to get it out there. They have to get it out there, and usually you have some additional things like, there can be, recommendations or videos or audios or exhibitions or other things that are linked to the thing you are producing. And then you have events. Usually you have events, and you can also have mobilities linked to your. You can have mobilities linked to it, which are not just linked to the partner meetings, but for example, you can do training of trainers, or you can have student mobilities, or what they used to call LTTA, which is no longer actually mentioned as such, which is a learning and training activity. Learning, training, and teaching activity, which means that, for example, the staff or the project members go somewhere to have a training that is not directly linked to the project, but can help the project move forward into a certain direction. So these are, yes. And then you have events, usually always events. I mean, the thing with Erasmus, like with any other project, is about dissemination and impact. And I think dissemination and impact is a huge issue in Erasmus for two reasons. First of all, there is never enough money or time to actually bring it out as it should be and reach the people. I think half of the time, the dissemination targets are probably not met in these projects. And it's sometimes also linked to the fact that the partners participating are not experts on the actual topic that they're treating. They may be experts in education, but not in the sector they're working with. That is a problem. And that is also a problem linked to the evaluators. But the evaluators are also usually education people and not experts in sectors that sometimes are mentioned in the project. So sometimes they don't really know the sector, and therefore it's hard for them to evaluate projects. That's one thing. And then to get back to the dissemination, the other thing is what we have. I mean, I think it's been treated a bit better now in Horizon. You can tell me about that. But in Erasmus, it's still a huge problem. The project ends, and then that's it.
Yep.
And then that's it. And then, you have to promise you have a sustainability plan. You promise you will continue. The website will stay there forever. But in practice, nothing happens. And so my sort of biggest thing has been to always advocate or say that there has to be at least some kind of possibility for follow-up funding for best practice projects, for example, that have been selected as best practices, and there should be an opportunity somehow to continue.
This is an issue, right? So you have it's a problem. It's a generic problem for all EU funding, all programs, funding schemes. That to secure that the things move on after the funding ends. So it's something that the Commission has a huge focus on. It's been raised, especially in Horizon Europe, because that's innovation research. But generally, that securing one way or the other. And I think if you do this, you need to from the project funding administrator side, they say, look, we come and fund something that you have an idea for something you want to do, so it should be able to stand alone after our funding stops. So we give it money to get it rolling, but it should be able to stand by itself after some years, right? That's the rationale behind.
Yeah.
But that's the idea from the funding administrator side. But it's not always possible. It's the real world is much more complex than that.
It is, but then I mean, if you look at education providers who are dependent on public funding, how are they going to do this?
Exactly,
I mean, they're not going to be able to invest. So this is, and I think a lot of projects are still being approved that don't really. We can already see what's going to happen. I mean, before the project starts, and that is for me a big problem. But I think we got off track a bit because we were with the cooperation project. But then within that, you have a lot of different calls. So you have the strategic partnerships that we spoke about, but then you have other calls which are more, let's say, a bit higher level. One could almost say in terms of funding, and also more demanding, more competitive, because they are centralized. So you have the ones that are managed by the national agencies, which would be the mobilities, and then the strategic partnerships, the small ones, and the ones I mentioned, which had 3 levels. And the other calls are centralized. And so that is managed by the European Education and Culture Executive Agency.
Yeah.
And so that's a different story.
It's interesting that they've done it like this.
They changed it because it was all centralized before, and then they moved it into the different agencies. And that is also one of the challenges, because they're all different. As I said, you have to know where to submit, because they all have different budgets. They all have different priorities, and sometimes you kind of have to be friends with them to get it funded, depending on the country. And so there are, that makes it more complex also.
I know the formation project that I had that was decentralized. So they were the Hungarian national agency that they had to communicate with, and that created some problems administratively for them as they moved on. You know, like the level of check.
Oh yeah.
Of costs that has been carried out in the project. So this kind of it's a very different administrative and bureaucratic tradition throughout Europe in different countries.
Yes, I mean also language-wise. For example, I just finished a report for the French agency. We actually had a small-scale project because we were testing it. And everything has to be translated into French. You can write the application in English, but then the report has to be in French. So you have to translate everything. And then if you go to Romania, for example, they are so strict with putting everything exactly like, for example, I remember we did for a project once a roll-up, and you had to put the disclaimer and the number and everything on the front, like in the middle, so that, I mean, the things look so unattractive, nobody's ever going to look at it, but it's the rule, it has to be like this. And how are you actually going to communicate with your target groups? Because they are not the commission or any kind of agency, you know, they're not interested in seeing any of these numbers.
Nope.
They want to see something that it speaks to them. And this is something that also doesn't work in my view. It's like, okay, we need to have a website communication tools that are attractive for our target groups, and not just tick all the boxes for the agency. Like you put the number in the right place or whatever, and who cares? I mean, if it doesn't look good for the people supposed to use it, it's not going to have success. So, and that is simple marketing principles, which have still not kind of reached the commission.
No. I'm not sure if that was good, but it's that's how it is, anyways. We still have a handful of things we need to cover, so I'm going to push us a little bit into just shortly the target group stakeholders, core target stakeholders. We have been circling around it, right? Just to make sure we cover so people get an idea. So we actually did talk about it, no?
Yes, we can talk about those. I still haven't finished with the other stuff, but anyway.
Sorry. Come.
No. We're still with the goals and the key action too, because
sorry.
we have just to briefly say what there is. So because I spoke about the ones that are of higher level, a bit more challenging. So you have the alliances for education, for example. And when you look at these calls, they are more specific. You have a list of kind of objectives and more specific objectives that you have to reach. This goes a bit closer to what you would have in Horizon. It's still any sector you want that you can adapt to the call, but in terms of what you have to achieve and the composition of the partnership, you have to be much more careful in reaching these objectives. There is much more detail about the impact that is expected, so you really have to tailor your project much more around these calls. For example, you also have the Centers for Vocational Excellence, which is this call, which is particularly for vocational education, for connecting vocational education centers around a certain topic. It's almost a bit also like the idea of the European universities, which is also usually linked to some kind of thematic element. And then there are some other calls as well. But as I said, the guide is 441 pages this year. So anyone who wants to work with Erasmus, that is the first place to look and dive into the topic, really.
I think in my timeline series, I give advice to people how to read a call text or how to identify the calls that they need to look for. So I would sort of give the same advice here, that if you identify the PDF, this PDF document, and use search words to search through the document, because it's too big for you to start looking. So first, you want to identify what you can of course look through the table of contents if there's anything where you say, okay, these are the areas, and then search yourself through with the key elements you want to search, apply for, because then you cannot read everything.
No. But I think the first part, which is just part A about what it's all about and what the priorities are, I think that is a must for anybody. And then for the rest, I just think people should start by being a partner in a project to get to know it better, the program, and that's the best way. So yes, sorry about that.
No. No, but it's because as mentioned, this is a little bit out of my comfort zone because I haven't been working with it. So I'm not sort of super on top how the program works. So good, thanks. So target groups. So we already covered it more or less, right? So
target groups. You have the target groups. Generally would be either pupils, students, educators of any kind, trainers, and then the professionals. That would be the core target groups, and then anybody else. Like as a secondary target group, either sector specific based on which sector you work in, or then networks, public authorities, policymakers, this kind of sort of broader target groups, depending on what it's about. Yeah. But ultimately, the key target group is always linked to the education sector, of course, in one or the other sector. So that's quite straightforward in the sense, youth projects, young people. I think what would be interesting also to talk about is the overlap between the different things, because the official definition of youth is up until 25. And then when you talk about adult education, obviously that starts at 18 when we're all officially adults. So there is an overlap between adult and youth already. And then there are overlaps also between, of course, you can be a young person working in vocational education, or you can be a student. I think sometimes people are not sure which sector to pick for their project. Mm-hmm. That is a challenge also when you start, when you maybe don't really understand what sector is relevant for what you're doing. And there, I think the most important thing is to actually look at the priorities within the sectors to understand where it fits best.
Thanks. Let's have a look at the how to apply. And I think what I put here in the rundown, it's... And here I will be fading out of the first part of this double episode introducing the Erasmus Plus program. Second part of this double episode will be released next Monday. Here we will continue going through how to actually apply for funding from the funding scheme. We will look at the evaluation regime. We will look at what happens when funding is actually received. And then we will have a talk about the do's and don'ts from Ulla's point of view. That you need to listen to. See you then.